I don't know if you've seen the reports which suggest in some schools across the country, children are being allowed to identify as furries or animals with some human characteristics. Could be a horse, could be a cat, a dog, even dinosaurs or inanimate objects like the moon. So, for example, in one secondary school in Wales, a child will apparently meow like a cat rather than respond in English. Now, on the one hand, you could hear these stories and think they're isolated cases, and there are 9 million children across the UK in school. This is just a handful who are being indulged and allowed, and maybe they'll grow out of it, and let's hope so. But I think it's more sinister than that. How have we got to a point where we're actively telling children as young as 11 or 12, and sometimes even younger than that there are multiple different genders that they could choose from, and it's all about looking within and self-identifying? I think this is what happens when we allow gender ideology to infiltrate schools and to go unchallenged. It creates moral confusion in the rising generation. We're storing up problems for ourselves, potentially for generations to come, unless we take action. And taking action starts from a Christian perspective by boldly and courageously affirming what God has said is good. And if you go to the very early chapters of Genesis, where God not only creates, not only brings order out of chaos, not only is there a repeated binary pattern of light and dark and sun and moon and animals on the land and animals in the sea, but more importantly, that second creative act on the 6th day when God made human beings, when there's a dramatic pause in the narrative and it changes slightly, gives us a hint of the Trinity being involved as it says, let us make mankind in our image. It says very clearly, Genesis 1:27, he made them male and female. There are 2 biological sexes. There are 2 genders. And when we uphold what God has said is good, we put in place the right boundaries, and that is what allows children to flourish. So we need to affirm the goodness of what God has said, and we need to pray. Pray for schools up and down this country. Pray for teachers up and down this country, that instead of affirming gender ideology and creating the kind of moral confusion that we're seeing in schools today, that they will be willing and able to take a stand for truth. Pray for Christians especially who are out there in primary schools, secondary schools, and in colleges who are seeking to do their bit to stand for truth. This is ultimately about protecting young minds and young hearts. And never ever forget the words of Jesus, who said that if you put a stumbling block in the way of the least of these, using the example of children, then it would be better for you if a millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. We look to the example of Jesus, who welcomed little children, but didn't welcome them in order to confuse their young minds with the lies of gender ideology, but instead welcomed them that they might know him and come into the freedom of knowing truth. That's what this is ultimately about. Gender ideology leads to moral confusion and a lack of freedom, whereas true freedom is found in living within the boundaries that God has put in place, and God made us male and female.